Let's go ahead and kick off this party. My name is Garth Johnson. I'm the curator of ceramics at the ASU Art Museum Ceramics Research Center, and I could not be more excited to, thank you, to be introducing this panel with two of my great heroes and one of my great hero organizations. The American Craft Council has been an organization that looks out not only for the careers of artists, but also the legacy of artists. And through publications like Craft Horizons and now American Craft magazine, there are incredible archives and incredible ephemera that are out there. And the two people sitting to the right of me make it their mission to not only dig up those archives and dig up those pieces, but make them available to the public. So Julie Hanus is the editor-at-large of American Craft magazine, and American Craft has been very generous in sending boxes and boxes of their brand new issue to NCECA. So you can pick up copies of that new issue down in the ASU Ceramics Research Center reading room in Area A, and also, I think, on the main floor as well. And Julie, I love you a whole lot, but I am totally obsessed with Jessica Shaykett, who is the head librarian for the American Craft Council, and I make it my business to spend time digging through archives, and the American Craft Council Library's archives are my favorite archives in the country, and Jessica has tirelessly made things available for my research and the research of other scholars and obsessives worldwide who visit the American Craft Council headquarters in Minneapolis, Minnesota. So think about the research that you are interested in, thrill to the nuggets that you are going to be shown, and pay a visit to the American Craft Council headquarters in Minneapolis. So without further ado, Jessica Shaykett and Julie Hanus.
Thank you, Garth. All right. So thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. My name is Jessica Shaykett, as Garth mentioned, and this is Of Cow Piles and Caveats. So can I get a show of hands? How many of you have ever actually visited the American Craft Council Library? Oh, woohoo! Yay! So some of you know already that it's a very special place. And for those of you that aren't familiar with the collections, you're in for a real treat today. The ACC Library has over 20,000 books and exhibition catalogs, as well as hundreds and hundreds of periodicals documenting the contemporary craft movement across all craft media. Our archive covers craft history from the 1940s to the present day, and we also have individual files on almost 4,000 artists, with everything from handwritten letters, work samples, to original slides. We also have the entire archive for Craft Horizons, which ACC began publishing in 1941, and still publishes today, and you probably know it as American Craft magazine. Craft Horizons was the preeminent magazine dedicated to craft in the mid-century. So basically, this is a collection like none other, and our work in recent years has really been dedicated to digitizing the collection and making the resources available online. So let's start with something really fun today. A rare clip of renowned ceramist Toshiko Takazu from around 1970.
Clay to me is quite beautiful. You can forget yourself in the clay and be in tune with it. And when you say in tune, you even hear music occasionally with the clay. When I first heard it, it was kind of a shock. And then I tried to hear again. And when you try, you don't. When you let things happen, naturally it does work. It's like poetry, I think, working in clay.
So the
The clip that you just saw was actually from a full-length documentary film that Johnson & Johnson, yes, back in the heyday of when the baby powder company sponsored ceramics exhibitions, filmed for Objects USA 1969, which was probably one of the most influential exhibitions of its era. It featured more than 300 works. It traveled to 21 American and 10 European venues. And a lot of the ceramic artists featured in Objects USA, such as Toshiko and Wayne Higme and Karns, would go on to become household names. And we have an amazing collection of materials from this exhibition and others of its era in our library, because before the Museum of Arts and Design was MAD, it was the Museum of Contemporary Crafts, and it was part of ACC. So we still hold all sorts of beautiful catalogs, publications, photographs, and other ephemera from this period in our collections, which are available to see.
So part of the joy of looking at some of these materials are seeing the contrasts. For example, Clayton Bailey's quirky and outrageous work, his belching bowl on the right, or on the left, I'm sorry, side by side with the serene and kind of introspective work of Toshiko Takazu. And these photos are from Objects USA. And speaking of Clayton, we want to share a small clip with the audio that some of you, if you were at Garth's talk yesterday, you may have seen this, this clip of Clayton Bailey. If you are, I should mention that if you didn't have the opportunity to see Garth's talk yesterday, I highly recommend that you check his slides out. They're available through the NCECA app, and they're pretty spectacular and give a lot of history about funk and nut art.
So time for Clayton.
Time for Clayton.
I took my first course in 1958. I got my master's degree in, and I've been doing it mostly ceramics since then. I'd had that couple of years when I was doing the rubber stuff. And I had about a 6-month shot doing electronic stuff, like electric shocker that you hold and that keeps giving you little jolts. I've been turned on more by some toys I've been collecting than I have been about art, or sculpture. I'm interested in making these things, and I enter them in shows where they're called, by some stretch of the imagination, pottery.
Okay, so probably no presentation about the ACC archives would be complete without a little bit of Peter Volquez. I've spent some time over the past year digging out Volquez photographs, slides, letters, audio and video recordings, catalogs, and other ephemera for the Museum of Arts and Design, which just staged an exhibition documenting Volquez's breakthrough years. So here he is, 1957, stirring up trouble, which he had a tendency to do. He also had a habit of judging exhibitions and often awarding the top prizes to his own students. So people had feelings about that, and they didn't hesitate to let the editors of Craft Horizons know. So here's an example on the right of some letters that were sent in after the awards, the award winners were announced. And I'm just going to read a little bit of the letter. So, sirs, the greatest example of complete juror bias occurred with the announcement of the winners of the 5th Miami National Ceramic Exhibit, of which Peter Volquez was one of 3 juror members. The listing of winners is Paul Soldner, John Mason, Ken Price, Bill Bengston, and Jerry Rothman came as almost no surprise to those of us in Los Angeles. They are all students of Peter Volquez. Peter Volquez students cannot be the only ones producing award-winning ceramics, and one even wonders if their work could be classified as good ceramic ware, considering that they are but pieces badly thrown, badly glazed, and badly crafted. So Peter Volquez usually didn't really give a shit what people thought about him, as far as I know, but he did take the time to respond to this criticism, and this is a rare letter that he wrote to Craft Horizons magazine. So in response, it's a very well-crafted letter, he defends his jurying practices, saying, "I admit that I am biased. I am biased in the sense that when I jury a show, there is only one thing that I look for, and that is quality." And he goes on to say, "My job is to jury pottery, not personalities."
So Volquez generated a lot of archival materials in the 1960s. The translation is he stirred up a lot of trouble. And perhaps the largest of them all erupted in 1961 when Rose Slivka, who's on the right here, she was the editor-in-chief of Craft Horizons. She wrote The New Ceramic Presence, which is an article. If you have not read it, I encourage you to visit our archives, our digital collections, and read it. In it, Rose Slivka lauded the eclectic vision that she saw in work of Volquez, Arneson, and Harold Myers. And you can actually go online and read the original article, all the letters and fallout that ensued from it, because one of Jess's projects in the past 2 years has been to completely digitize the entire archive of Craft Horizons magazine from 1941 to the present day, after it transitioned to becoming American Craft in 1979. So that's all freely available online. And it really served as sort of a critical foundation for the field. It was, as she mentioned, the preeminent journal of contemporary craft. But right now, one more Volquez treat for you. We want to show you something that has never been shown in public before. It's a film reel of Volquez working in his studio, shot by his student Don Serrer in 1965, which we recently acquired in the library. So you lucky people who came here today, here it is, and the music is really jazzy. I think I love most that somebody looked at that and thought, that's the music we need to set that to. I mean, the mustache, it's all there. It's all happening at once.
Of course, our library recognizes influence in all forms, and Slivka's New Ceramic Presence was in sharp contrast to the humble but no less influential work of potters like Warren Mackenzie. If you're a Mackenzie fan, you really ought to make a pilgrimage to Minnesota and to the ACC Library, because we have a pretty amazing collection of slides and ephemera on the artist. And Warren also still lives and works in Stillwater, Minnesota, which is not far from our office. Warren, of course, was famous for leaving his pots out in a shed and letting people pay on the honor system. He did it up until just a few years ago. And on the right, you can see a postcard that he had mailed to the American Craft Council, letting us know that he and his wife were headed east, and we could go ahead and get our pots from the yard.
I just want to add, can you see that he wrote Mackenzie on the flag that the tiny bus is flying?
So Mackenzie trained with Bernard Leach, and he helped organize Leach and Hamada's legendary tour across the United States in the early 1950s. And he wasn't exactly interested in the capital A art versus craft debate. In fact, here on the left, we have Harold Meyer's work, The Big Pile, which was featured in the New Ceramic Presents. And I'll just read from Warren's letter published in the November 1961 issue of Craft Horizons, which is his response to seeing the big pile. For the longest time, we had thought that the big pile in our neighbor's pasture was good only for enriching the fields. Now we find that if you can pile it high enough with the written word or in the visual fields, it can pass for art. In the future, we will give up any attempt to make functional ceramics as an expressive form, since apparently containers make almost no demands on our sensibilities, leaving us free to concentrate on getting the cows to cooperate for higher and larger works of capital A-R-T art. There's also a scathing letter from Marguerite Walden right above it, where she says, I think she says, stop corrupting something about stop corrupting the young people.
So, Volquez, often referred to as a rock star, New Ceramic Presence. We all know there's a real rock star in our field, Ron Nagle. This is, how many people have ever seen this before? A couple of you? This is an ad for Ron Nagle's first solo album, Bad Rice, which his label, Warner Brothers, ran in Craft Horizons in 1971. And I love that they said this should finally equalize his rock and crock reputations. And although I know that Ron's music is really well respected, I think that the crock may have won in the end. And what I love about pieces like this, Ron, of course, is a fellow of the council, so he has an artist file, one of those 4,000 files that Jessica was referring to earlier. And it's full of the sort of typical things that you would expect to find in a library archive about ceramic artists. Photos of his work, correspondence, exhibition catalogs. But the files are also stuffed with these sort of quirky little pieces that show you a sort of more full color picture of somebody's life. And also the sort of collective history of the field. Here's another one that we love. I don't know why I keep pointing this there, like you have to use it like an old-fashioned TV remote. This goes all the way back to the 1940s. And on the left side here, we have an article in Craft Horizons about an exhibition of tiles. And the ensuing letters to the editor on the right about whether or not artists who use a commercially pre-pressed tile form may or may not refer to themselves as tile makers. And it was a really fiery debate. And what I love about it is, in some ways, we're still having these conversations today. You know, what is the line between something handmade and designed or processed? Does technology complement or disrupt our work? Although I have to say, in the 1940s, people really knew how to throw some shade. So I'll just read a really brief quote. One letter writer wrote, "If an artist wishes to use a commercial tile as a base for artistic expression, more power to him. Caveat, he should be frank, however, and admit this as his purpose. He should not consider himself a creative maker of tiles."
So speaking of strong opinions, and also just people that we collect unique materials for at the American Craft Council, we have some great ephemera on many artists like Marguerite Walden, who of course founded the legendary Pond Farm Artist Colony in the 1940s. Here on the left, we have her book, Pottery, Form, and Expression, which the ACC published in 1959. So we have the first edition in our library, and the text, if you have not read this text, it's really a rejection of a purely technical education, which resonates today perhaps more than ever before. To quote Wilden Hain, and this is one of my favorite quotes, "It is not enough to teach techniques. We want to develop young people for a wholesome and hopeful generation, for a generation which believes in the value of humanities, which will face the problems of our time with honesty and without fear, with the deep will to understand other men and to learn and to build a better future." So this certainly goes beyond just pottery, form, and expression. So it's a very holistic approach to education. And then here in the center, we have a very famous portrait of Wilden Hain. It's one that you'll frequently see in articles about her. It was taken by Otto Hagel and given to the ACC and is in our archives today.
You have the original negative for the portrait, right?
Yes.
Yeah, it's really cool.
So same coast, but perhaps the other end of the continuum. Craft Horizons was one of the first magazines to cover the funk ceramics movement that began in the late 1950s, peaking with this cover article on Arneson's work in January 1970. In case you can't read the deck on the headline, it says, "A plumber's nightmare and a psychiatrist's holiday." With this tagline, you can only imagine the letters that we have in our archive for this one. And you know, it's funny, but I don't know how often we talk about communities like Pond Farm and movements like Funk Ceramics back to back, but they really do represent the drive and the flexibility, the space in this field to pursue art as you see it. And Arneson would, of course, like Wilden Hain, inspire generations of artists. And we're showing a lot of videos for just a 30-minute presentation, and we kind of have to move along quickly, but we can't resist. We really want to show this next clip. It's of one of Arneson's proteges, David Gilhooly, and he's talking about his work during an exhibition at the Museum of Contemporary Crafts in the early 1970s.
Okay.
Anytime?
Anytime.
Anytime. Well, let's see. This is a Frog Napoleon, one of a set of the great frog leaders, including Frog Medusa, Frog Dracula, Frog Victoria, and Frog Washington, all of which are offensive in some parts of the world. Frog Napoleon, of course, is offensive to French people, and Victoria is offensive to Englishmen, and Frog Dracula is offensive to Romanians. But this is just one of them. A fake marbleized piece in the great traditions of the pink-cheeked George Washington, which the British exported in great quantities to America during the Revolution. Was a very popular item, and indeed the Revolution was a good thing for the English because they sold a lot of extra ceramics, especially to the colonies. Other things.
That is really worth seeking out the whole clip on, by the way. So we wanted to show you just a couple of pieces from our archive, and we should speed up here because we're running short on time. But around this idea of community and sort of finding your place, one of the great things about the archive, sort of assessed as a whole and walking through it, tracing the different threads, are seeing all the ways that people contributed their time to forming the field as we know it today. So here on the right, we have a snapshot of Toshiko again with a young Robert Turner volunteering their time to jury the first ACC show in Vermont in 1966. And on the other side, we have the Craft Students League of New York, which we also have some great materials from. This was associated with the YMCA, and for much of the 20th century, their objective was to sort of bridge professionals and amateurs, teachers and students, and forge those connections. I think a lot really similar to the spirit of NCCA today. Here's another really great piece in the library. This is the Craftsman's Cookbook. You cannot check it out because it's a very rare cookbook and we can't have any flour on it. But you can actually access the whole cookbook online as part of the digital collections. We've scanned it. And it contains recipes from Don Wrights, Paul Saldner, Karen Karns, Paula Winokur's got one in there. This is Cynthia Bringle's Easy Oatmeal Bread. And I just want to say for the record that this was not a free-for-all. The former editor-in-chief of American Craft Magazine tested and certified every recipe that made it into the book. And what I really love about seeing objects like this in the archive is that I like to look at this as, through the lens of the important work that's happening today to connect the local food movement and ceramics and the idea of gathering communities. This, you could say, is an ancestor of Across the Table, Across the Land.
Okay, so it really is the personal things that make the archives so special. And this is one of my personal favorites. It's a letter from Karen Karns, who just passed away last year. And she wrote it to the ACC in 1998. She wrote many letters to the ACC, but this one she wrote just a few weeks after her studio had burned down, destroying 44 years of her material history. And it also happened at the time when she had just been named the ACC's gold medalist. And I'm sure as people involved in the ceramic arts, you can appreciate the preciousness of having not only her words and her ideas, but the sentiment preserved in Karen's actual hand. So Karen writes about the response following her studio fire, saying, "As words circulated throughout the ceramics community, letters from potters and collectors all over the country have told me how much my work, my teaching, and my presence in the craft community has meant to them. I am so moved by the love expressed."
A part of the archive that we haven't actually talked a lot yet about is our educational documentation. And we have a lot of it because ACC really served as a hub and sort of disseminator of information in the foundational years of the field. And on the left here, we have photo documentation of what is believed to be the first ever solar kiln firing, which worked. Paul Saldner and Ken Hendry staged it at the 7th National ACC Conference in 1973. I just love all the people holding up their little reflective panels. And we also have a lot of slide sets. Here on the right is just one gorgeous image from a 66 slide set of Paul Saldner demonstrating his raku process. And he also wrote a booklet about the process for us. And Don Wrights was another prolific contributor to our educational holdings and all of our sort of process slide sets. So for example, we have a slide set similar to this one of Paul of Don demonstrating his salt glaze process. And we have some video of him as well.
See, even though around the shop here, I suppose there are 15 or 20 vase-type forms, but each one seems to build up a personality. So what you do in the decoration and the glaze, even though you're doing a lot of the same kind form, for instance, the same kind because they're vases, let's say, you still have to sense what that piece is about, you see? That's what's so important. And if you got to just kind of figure out its characteristic. I find a much more sense of discipline in this piece. So I'm not going to spill anything on this one. I think that would wipe out what I'm trying to do because, of what happens here. I find this piece having more, majesty about it or something.
So archives are so valuable because they can document an artist's full career, how it changes, how it evolves, how it grows over time. So here, for example, we have Betty Woodman, some of her untitled functional work from the 1960s on the top right, and here on the bottom, some more recent sculptural work. Betty, of course, was given the ACC's highest gold medal honor in 2014, And so we visited her studio to continue the process of building her artist file, because the artist files really are living files. And we thought we'd close today by showing you a clip of that, because we've traveled through a lot of time here, but the truth is the library never stops growing.
I'm Betty Woodman, and I'm an artist. My earliest experience was definitely when I was in high school. I had an art teacher, Miss Miles, who had gone for a summer program, I think, to Cranbrook. She came back and talked the school into letting her teach a pottery class. I made a picture. It was rust-colored and sort of dry. And then when I went back to pick it up, there it was green and with black overtones, and it was like some magical thing. And that was, I just decided that what I was going to do was to be a potter.
So that's it. That's all we have time for. But Jessica and I will hang around if you have questions, and we really encourage you to get in touch, because the library, of course, is carried into the future through use.